and welcome to Salmon's Pizzeria. I am Alex, and today I'm joined by a very, very special guest, the voice of Scottish football, if you may, Ian Crocker. Ian, how are you?
I'm good, Alex. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for joining me. And I think we'll just get stuck into it. Obviously, your career started quite a while ago at Capital Gold, or so I'm told, anyways. It's come a long way since then. So it's a unique role, Ian. How did you kind of come across this opportunity?
Yeah, it's a unique job for sure. And back in the day when I was a lot younger, there were many different ways to get in. I didn't do a course or anything. Obviously, loved my football. Grew up in a place called Weymouth in Dorset, a little village on the south coast, supporting my local team, Weymouth, and then moved on to support West Ham because they had the same colours, which seemed like a good idea when I was 9 years old. And actually, they won the FA Cup the first year I started supporting them. And actually, I moved to London when I was 17, did a few office jobs, including at the BBC. Couldn't really break into broadcasting. Actually got a job at West Ham doing the tannoy announcing, which was obviously a dream job for me. I was only 21 at the time. And from there, met Jonathan Pearce, who's now BBC and various broadcasters. He was running Capital Radio along with a guy called Richard Park, who used to be at Clyde in Glasgow, very big in radio for sure. And actually ended up, although I was working at the BBC, actually ended up working for Capital Radio alongside the gig at West Ham and then moved there permanently. And we had a great team at Capital back then. Jonathan, obviously, Steve Wilson, who's now a Match of the Day, Dave Clark, Julian Waters, Rob Watton, who we see on Sky Sports News. So sorry if I've missed anybody out. It was a good bunch of people to work for.
Yeah, and then it went from there to a couple other roles before joining Sky Sports, which is, for many people a big dream in football.
Yeah, I was. This shows how lucky you can be. I was working at Capital Radio when the Sky actually launched their Premier League coverage back in '92 at Terry Venable's bar in Kensington in London. It was a Monday lunchtime, and because we'd all been working over the weekend, nobody was in apart from me because I was doing the breakfast shift, and I was absolutely knackered from working the weekend. So I said to Jonathan, I don't really fancy going to this. He said, we got to go get some interviews and do this. Anyway, I went and ended up sitting next to a guy called Vic Wakeling, who was the head of Sky Sports. And I think after a combination of a long weekend and a 4 a.m. start and a couple of glasses of wine, I was telling him that I'd be working for him soon, even though I'd hardly commentated at that point. But funnily enough, a few months later, one of his producers rang and asked if I'd like to work on the Bundesliga back then, which they were covering as well. So started on that in 1992, but I still sometimes think, why have I hadn't gone along to that lunch? So it's thin lines in this industry.
Yeah, and then in '98 becoming the voice of Scottish football. I mean, and unbelievable. Anyone who watches Scottish football knows exactly who you are. And it was only the 4 years to begin with at Sky before they lost the contract, but that was only the beginning for you because you've simply been around for a while.
Yeah, too long, some would say. No, it was fantastic to get that gig. There were a lot of Scottish people at Sky and, in fact, in the television industry generally back then. And they certainly had faith in me to do that. I mean, I probably covered it from afar then, although I did do Aberdeen Dunfermline playoff for Grampian TV in 95. It was 95, 96, around then. But yeah, when the SPL started, fantastic. And I can safely say I've loved every minute of it. It's football from the heart. Love the passion of the players and the fans and everyone. And it's been an absolute pleasure on and off for 26 years now. And if somebody told me that in 1998 it'd still be trotting out, some would say, the same old lines now, then that would have surprised me. But it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege.
Yeah, and like you say there are maybe same old lines is how you phrase it, but famous lines, and ones that stick in your mind. One of the biggest ones is it's Derby Day in Glasgow. The Old Firm takes up a lot of time for people in Scotland and a lot of headspace as well. Over 60 derbies you've done, and just sum up how big that is, and because it's kind of hard to see from the outside how big an Old Firm can be.
Absolutely massive, a unique sporting occasion Yes, it's got a bit of baggage that we could probably do without, but the actual event as a sporting contest, there is nothing like it. All the managers say it, the players say it, and the commentators certainly say it. And it's been fantastic to commentate on so many, because I don't remember too many 0-0s along the way. Although, funnily enough, the first one I ever did was a 0-0, 1998. Lionel Charbonnier saving from Henrik Larsson, if I remember correctly. But in almost every game, there's something happening. The madness we had this season of the 3-3 game at Ibrox, which was, I do find when you get an early goal in those games, then that's it. It's open season. It all kicks off. You could end up any way anyone wants it to. Fantastic occasions to commentate on. Obviously, the passion of the fans. I am actually neutral, even though nobody ever believes me, because I do support Weymouth and West Ham. Everyone goes, well, you've got to have a Scottish club. Well, not really, because I support both or all Scottish clubs through this job. So it's quite nice to be a neutral on those days, even though, as I say, nobody really believes that I am.
Yeah, and is there one that you commentated on that kind of sticks out to you?
Well, I always mention too. I mean, that 3-3 game this season was something else. But going back, when Martin O'Neill arrived in Glasgow at Celtic, I dealt with Martin a few times at Leicester. Fascinating character, really interesting guy. And I thought, well, this is going to be interesting, Martin, in Glasgow. And the first Old Firm certainly was interesting, because Celtic were 3-0 up in 11 and a half minutes. Rangers got back to 3-1, and if I remember correctly, had a goal wrongly disallowed, possibly by Rod Wallace. Would have made it 3-2 before the break. Who knows? Maybe Henrik Larsson still would have taken over, which he certainly did that day. And when I do, with his famous chip, when I do say the best games, I obviously have to do one of each. But for me, I always loved cup finals, the one-off, the anything can happen scenario. And the 2002 cup final, which was the last Old Firm final until this season, amazingly, was just one of those great events when, Celtic were twice ahead. Rangers scored in injury time to win it. Peter Lovenkrands, who had a habit of scoring big goals in big games. And I do love cup finals. We lost the rights to them, sadly, a few years ago up here, but generally I've been on the right side of rights, so I can't complain too much, except I actually do to everyone about still not doing the Scottish Cup final, because you can't beat a one-off final.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about Martin O'Neill being a character, especially now there are definitely a couple of characters in Scottish football, but talk us through kind of your experience with Brendan Rodgers.
Yeah, well, Brendan's been good to deal with. He's straightforward as they come. What you see is what you get. Philip Clement I've quite liked as well. I think his the way he arrived and actually the job he'd done. I mean, Rangers probably should have won the title this season and could have won the cup as well. It didn't happen either way. But when he took over and they were 7 points behind, 8 points behind on New Year's Day when they lost the derby, it must annoy the fans that they actually got so close. But I wonder. I've got a couple of mates who are big Rangers fans. I keep saying, I bet you never thought you'd even get that close back in October when he arrived. So I like the cut of his jib as well. There's been so many over the years to deal with. Walter Smith was outstanding one for me, because just an absolute gentleman from day one. Used to ring him for his team on a Sunday morning, and he'd tell you everything you need to know. Martin was a bit different in that way, because he was quite late picking his team, so he'd turn up at games with a scrunched up piece of paper with a formation written out on, but it still worked for me, although a couple of times he'd send John Robertson out 2 minutes later, having changed his mind. I've got Derek McInnes writing out his teams for me these days as well. So not back in the day, managers were more trusting, I think, of commentators. Maybe not so many this day, but still a few that do it.
Yeah, I guess one last thing on the Old Firm then before we move on. Going forward, as you say, Philippe Clement has come in and is doing a good job, and Brendan Rodgers has just won a double for them. Going forward, how much of a battle do you see next season, and do you lean towards one of them?
I think it's tricky, because obviously Rangers have got a rebuild, which will be quite extensive, and they look like they're trying to get some early business done, which makes sense, because if you're going to have to gel a team together, and obviously they've got important games coming up early in the season, then the sooner the better. But yeah, I mean, like I say, I like the way he goes about his business, Philippe. When he actually reminds me of Walter Smith when you see him in and around Ibrox, in that his manner with people, and just shaking hands and pleasant. And but ultimately, he's not going to be judged by that, of course. And Walter was the same. I wouldn't have liked to have rubbed Walter up the wrong way. Likewise, anyone really, Brendan or Philippe. But yes, they've got a rebuild. But I think Celtic have to some extent as well. Obviously, not as big, but they did bring in a lot of the so-called project players that didn't really materialize into anything. Some of them haven't even been seen all season. So I think Celtic have got a bit to do as well. And I think Brendan will certainly want to have a better crack at the Champions League this season. I think that's why he came back. And that's why what he wanted to do last season, but they didn't really probably sign players with the Champions League in mind. And I'm sure now that they probably will with the change of format and everything. It's not rocket science, is it? If you're Brendan or any manager and you've achieved domestic success, your next plan is to do something in Europe. And I just hope that we hope all our clubs actually can do a bit better in Europe. I say that, Rangers were in a final recently. These things can happen. So, but yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, Celtic have just at the moment they've got the edge over Rangers. And watching the cup final Saturday towards the end, the last 20 minutes, I'm thinking Rangers are going to nip this, and then a sequence of events and Celtic pop up with a winner. And I think it could become psychological for Rangers now, except that there might be a lot of new players through the door without the baggage of, not doing so well against them over the years. I think Brendan's lost 1 in 18, if I'm right now, of Old Firms. And I mean, that is some record. And his players have also got the mentality on those big occasions. But having said that, it looked like it could easily have gone the other way Saturday. And I think it was either James Tavernier or Philippe said, a lot of the games have been close, but they'll be needing to get a bit closer. Having said that, if they hadn't lost to like Motherwell, Ross County, and drawn at Dundee, they might have astonishingly won the title without winning an Old Firm game, which would have been unheard of.
Yeah, and just to the other end of the table, and your most recent commentary game in Scotland is Ross County versus Raith Rovers. A big talking point, the kind of Scottish pyramid and playoffs. Do you think that only one club coming up from the Championship, potentially two with the playoffs, but it's less likely in recent years anyway? Do you think it's enough freshness for the top division, or do you think there maybe needs to be slight restructure there?
Personally, I'd like to see two teams coming up, or I'd like to see the playoffs not weighted quite so heavily towards the team that finishes 11th in the Premiership. I mean, Raith Rovers only had the semi-final, obviously, but other clubs have had to go through 4 games at the end of a long season to get to that final. It doesn't happen very often that the team comes up. Looked like it was going to last year. Partick Thistle, extraordinary game. Did happen with Dundee in 2021. I personally would like to see a one-off final like they do in England with the EFL playoffs, because I did those games for 4 years when we lost the Scottish contract in 2002. Next 4 years, did those games in the finals, which I actually played at the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff because Wembley was being redeveloped. Fantastic one-off occasions, and I know Ross County won the first leg. So I might be talking myself out of my own argument, but I just think in a one-off game, the championship team has got a better chance of cracking it and getting up. And yeah, Partick Thistle came close last year. Raith Rovers, they felt. I actually bumped into a lot of Raith Rovers fans up in Dingwall, and they were saying they were surprised at the difference even between there. They spoke very honestly. Actually, it was encouraging and refreshing that they were surprised actually how good Ross County were compared to what they were, because they've had a great season, but there was still a big gap between the two teams, which obviously showed out in the aggregate score.
Yeah, Ross County's a funny one and probably a decent talking point, because they did go through 3 managers this season. Probably all 2 people that you've probably dealt with in the past, and they are kind of long-standing football managers, and then this freshness and more Ross County-ness, if that makes sense, in Don Cowie. So what is it kind of like, not just going up to Dingwall, because I know it's a different club, but when a club goes through that transition for the media side of things and, seeing different managers, different speculation, etc.?
Yeah, Ross County, first of all, is a very well-run club. I think all of our crew who work in Dingwall on a regular basis love going there. Maybe getting there, not quite so much up the A9, but once you're there, it's a beautiful part of the world, and they're a fantastic club to deal with. Roy McGregor, I mean, has put a lot of money into the club. I think Don Cowie was probably meant to manage them one day, having, knows all about the club in the area, having started there. And I think, I just think I think that's 6 years running now, which is what Livingston also achieved. These clubs generally did a terrific job and are doing a terrific job to actually stay among the elite of Scottish football. I know time was up for Livingston, but 6 years, and you actually look at what they achieved in that time as well. Getting to a final, top six finishes, fantastic achievement from them. And Ross County look upon similarly, but they've won a cup. They've been to a Scottish Cup final themselves in recent-ish times. So great club to deal with, and they'll be having another go next season. I think they might like to avoid a third successive playoff this time around, though. It was a bit easier this time than last year.
Yeah, and a famous or infamous result this season, which you commentated on, whichever side you sit on, with them beating Rangers for the first time. Results like that, not just for Ross County, but for different clubs. And how big are they? When you're there, how big are they for the fan base and that reaction to picking up any points against the Old Firm? Unless you're Kilmarnock, of course, when you do it every season.
Yeah. Well played, Kilmarnock. They're more than a match with them at the moment. But it was a really weird game, that, because I honestly still don't quite know how Ross County pulled it off, although they utterly deserved it the way they played. But Rangers just picked a really bad day to have a really bad day. And, obviously the game after at Dundee proved costly as well. I don't think they could quite shake off the magnitude of that defeat. Yeah, when you see, I was brought up on non-league football, so I quite like it when the smaller clubs get a result, or a club gets a result against somebody in circumstances you don't expect. A bit like the FA Cup final at the weekend with Manchester United. I mean, who would have thought that? So nothing against Rangers, but being brought up in that environment, and then supporting West Ham as well, where, for a long, long time things conspired against us in cups and things. We were relegated up and down, and then we obviously conquered the whole of Europe by winning the Conference League, and you wait years for those sort of moments. But yeah, Ross County, I mean, the celebrations at the end of that game were brilliant. But I think there was also a sense of shock that they'd actually managed to beat Rangers for the first time in what was, I think, the 25th attempt, and to do it and actually deserve it as well. It was no fluke. And then, funnily enough, the end of the game against Wraith Rovers, I took a picture from the gantry, which is quite low down there. Exactly the same picture as the year before, where they were celebrating against Partick Thistle, of course. So, I think I think 10th would be considered a success for them next season, although we did see them break into the top six under Malky initially. And, who's to say with, I think their recruitment generally is pretty good, considering you've got to ask players to go a long, long way to play for them. And I think they've got a big summer ahead as well, because they'll be losing Jan Dander to Hearts, who's obviously been quite an influence to them. And Simon Murray, to be fair, must have a word for him. Outstanding season. Love the way he plays from the heart. 23 goals. Can't argue with that. Great guy. And well done to Ross County for staying up. But I would still prefer that one-off final, although if that had happened, they'd still be up. So good on them.
I wasn't going to touch on this, but you've just mentioned it there slightly, and it's made the question kind of come up. Was you said that Ross County have a really good recruitment in being able to get players to go up there. Cali Thistle have obviously moved their operations to Fife now, and it is realistically a nonsense talking point and should never be happening. But it is. How's it kind of seen from your perspective? Because it's not something that happens an awful lot.
In my opinion, utterly bizarre. I kind of get that they're trying to attract players from that area or from anywhere further south, really. But I used to love going to Cali Thistle. Many some good stories and on and off the pitch, I have to say, in Inverness. But no, a great club to deal with, and it's been sad to see their decline and relegation. But no, I think you've got to keep your own identity of your own city. And it's a game of opinions, but I'm absolutely baffled by that decision, to be honest.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone. It seems to be kind of ripped away from the fans almost, and every home game will be an away game for the players. Sticking with Scottish football and the Scottish League football, COVID was obviously a big season, and there weren't many fans, if any, at most of the games. How much of an impact did you see that having on players? Because there were some people did say it had a massive impact, and it was the one-off year that Rangers went and won it, and they won it in style. So how much of an impact did you see on the players and the operations when you were at the stadiums?
Honestly, on the players, not a lot. Players are funny breed. They just get on with things. And yeah, it was utterly weird commentating on games in an empty stadium. I mean, please God, we never go back to those days. It's actually, somebody mentioned that the other day, actually, when, and it's actually hard to believe that it happened. We're doing an Old Firm game or something behind closed doors, and especially in a city like Glasgow, where passions run so high and you're just there echoing around an empty stadium. It was utterly bizarre. Didn't know, you couldn't really go anywhere before or after the game, so because you weren't really allowed in some areas of the stadium, obviously, because of COVID. And you couldn't go down to the dressing rooms, for example. Everywhere was quite regimented, and rightly so. So I found myself kind of sitting in the car in an empty car park until about 10 minutes before kickoff, and walking through, and it was just weird. I remember another game I did at Newcastle, because I do quite a few games at Newcastle during COVID, and I got down there on a Friday night, and normally, as you would imagine, Newcastle on a Friday night is a bit like Glasgow on a Friday night. And I got there, parked up. I was in a COVID hotel, registered hotel. I had to walk about 5 minutes from the car park. Walking through the streets of Newcastle would have been like walking through the streets of Glasgow during COVID. It was eerie. The only people I saw were two police guys. And I always said St James's Park was a stadium that had an atmosphere when it was empty, and I never thought I'd get to test that. But it happened there as well. And a similar scenario with the not just the Glasgow stadiums, but everywhere, just doing games with no fans. Actually, it was bad enough for us. We're just, but for the actual fans to not be able to be part of it must have been horrendous.
Yeah, and just to kind of go back to the Old Firm on that, there was obviously like you say, players just get on with it. But do you think Celtic especially kind of missed their fans and missed that backing, because they are a team who we've seen in recent years win games by the grit of their teeth if they have to, and score 2-3 goals in added time?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I mean, fans do make a difference. I don't think they realise they do sometimes, but yeah, it could be an argument. Celtic, everything went a little wayward for them that season, but Rangers won it by some distance in the end. And I kind of get the argument, but I still think players, not just players, everyone in the world, in every walk of life, just had to get on with it back then. At least they were still able to play their football, and we were still able to cover it. So I think everyone did just get on with it.
On from one controversy to the other then in Scottish football. We're never short of one. But at the moment, something that's surrounded Scottish football and probably not just Scottish football, but we've definitely had the conversation up here, VAR. So your perspective on a game, you'll hear a lot more than we do. So kind of talk us through how you hear a decision and what you hear that we don't.
So we hear in my headphones the VAR guy. We don't hear the referee, but we do hear the VAR guy. Basically, so he's telling you what they're looking at or what they're checking, and you can pass that on to the viewers. Some of the guys are very good at it. Some are a bit quiet. So sometimes we wonder what's going on. But, I think they're getting the hang of it, and they're getting some full-time VAR guys in. I counter this with the Premier League VAR as well. When that was brought in, exactly the same as when we brought it in Scotland, it was for what was the phrase? Minimum interference for maximum benefit. Excuse me. And that sounded great at the time because, it would only check the major things. But really, from the off, everything's been checked, and there's like forensic examinations going on now. And I was a fan of it when it came in and when it started because I thought it would make a difference. But now, when we're actually actively looking at ways to disallow goals at times, I think, such are the forensic examinations, and sometimes you see players. Something might have happened. Nobody's complaining. They're just like, oh well, we'll let a goal in, we'll get on with it. But no, something will be found. And I do think the handball is not so much VAR, it's the actual handball rule that really needs looking at the moment, because it is ridiculous what can be given for a handball now. But that is down to the actual rule and not VAR. So I think, I don't know, I think it'd be interesting to see how the VAR people review their season. In England, the Premier League's having a vote as to whether to continue it, which I find is extraordinary, really. But as I say, because of the stop-start nature, and I do hate it when it takes forever to make. I suppose if you're going to get the correct call, great. But if it's not clear and obvious, then should we be looking? That was the whole thing. It's got to be clear and obvious, and I don't think we're waiting on things being clear and obvious now. We're just checking everything at the booze and see what we can do with it.
Yeah, that's it. And we've seen a lot of these decisions impact old firms, and it's maybe a bit different because you're there at the stadium, and people at home don't tend to see this as the same. But how frustrated the crowds get, especially once they've celebrated such a big goal. The one I'll maybe use an example for this is the Cyril Dessers one in the Old Firm, the 3-3 that you talked about earlier. That to bring it back to 2-2 for me, for a person who was in the stadium, it seemed like had that goal stood, that was the turn of the tide, and there was enough time for Rangers to go on and win it. But then that kind of couple of minutes where you had no idea what was going on, and it does become quite frustrating and almost makes the atmosphere, just a frustrated atmosphere all around.
Yeah, I'd agree with that for everyone, really. I mean, great celebration from Cyril as well. And I think it's the same for players, certainly same for commentators. When you're being perfectly selfish, you come out with a decent line on a goal like that, and then you think, oh, it's been disallowed, it's never going to be heard anywhere. And the same, more importantly, for Cyril. Big moments. And like I say, if it takes that long, then it can't be clear and obvious. But I think everyone's got down this avenue now of we've just got to, however long it takes, we've got to get the decision right. And maybe it's time to put a limit on it. If we can't actually figure it out in the space of a minute or two, then it can't be that clear and obvious. And I'll go back to the goal that Rangers scored in the first Old Firm of the season at Celtic Park as well. Listen, I know both clubs will have their queries on a lot of things, but I didn't see anything wrong with that. I don't think it was a foul. And, but having said that, I've got the numbers of a few referees in my phone, and all of them did think that it was the correct decision in the end. So that's the beauty of football. We all think differently. But yeah, if we can find a way to speed it up, or to just to not go so forensically detailed on it all. And I mean, I look at the Coventry offside against Man United in the semi-final of the FA Cup, and it's people say, yeah, well, it was offside, but it's so like hardly anything can you think. It does kill moments in games now, as we've seen in the Old Firm and as we saw there. And fine if a guy's standing 5-10 yards offside. So the Premier League vote on it will be interesting. I think they'll vote to keep it, but I think they'll be wanting to change the way it's applied in probably many ways.
Yeah, and that's it as well. There's already maybe enough pressure on our refs because we're told that everyone supports either Rangers or Celtic, and the teams outside of the Old Firm are questioning every decision, because as soon as it goes to VAR, they go, oh, we almost know that it's going to go in their favour. I mean, we all know the kind of infamous line, penalty to Rangers, which has become penalty to Celtic this season as well. How much of a difference do you see maybe in the Old Firm decisions and decisions for the other clubs, and how people react?
I think there's always going to be a reaction in Glasgow and in the Old Firm from both sets of fans, and referees have got a thankless job, really. But these are the games they want the referee, pretty much like the games we want to commentate on and players want to play in. Yeah, it's hard for them, and I suppose the temptation might be to go, right, I'll just wait for VAR on that. I don't actually think a lot of them do that. I think they're their own guys and they make the calls, and if it turns out wrong, there'll be no one more gutted than them that they made a mistake if it's been corrected by VAR or whatever. Thankless job. Listen, everyone gets accused of supporting. Honestly, I'm never, all the bias thing, it makes me laugh when I do the Old Firm, and I probably get 50-50 tweets afterwards saying, you must be a Celtic fan, you must be a Rangers fan, or usually the winning team, I must be supporting because you, and they say that you shouted louder for a Rangers goal than a Celtic goal. But on that point, by the way, one thing I have found difficult this season is with the lack of away fans. Whenever an away goal is scored in the Old Firm, I immediately think it just goes dead quiet. I think, hang on, has that been disallowed, or is, what's happening? And then you forget. Thankfully, we're getting them back next season, the away fans. But no, listen, everyone loves a good bias accusation, and I don't know if historically people still think so, but certainly the time I've been covering Scottish football, I don't see it from anyone particularly. But hey, I'm sure if you'll disagree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sticking with trying to get away from the Old Firm, but sticking with Scottish football, you touched earlier on the managers that you've in the Old Firm and how they've been to deal with. Has there been anyone, any part of Scottish football where you've maybe not seen eye to eye with?
No, not really. I fell out with Gordon Strachan once, but I'd have been surprised if I hadn't, to be fair. And don't get me wrong, I love Gordon. Dealt with him a few times in England when he was at Coventry, and so he's such a brilliant character, and he's always good with the lines and the quips. But yeah, it was a game Celtic were playing at Hibs when he was in charge, and it was Tony Mowbray's Hibs, and they were absolutely battering Celtic. And I think they went 2-0 up, and I said something like Celtic had been put in their place, well and truly put in their place. I actually got back and got a 2-2 draw that day, Celtic. But Gordon was fuming apparently, and he actually rang me on the Monday morning, but I missed the call. I tried ringing him back, but he didn't answer. And then I never saw him again for a few weeks. And I remember him marching up to me when I did, saying, making his point. And and I made my point saying, well, it was 2-0 to Hibs. They were playing brilliant football. He wasn't having it. And we didn't speak for a little while, but then after a while, he was fine. I know Chris Kamara knows him well, played with him. And Cammy said, he'll be fine in a bit. I think it took a bit longer than I thought it would. But when he was Scotland manager, we were back on track. And I was living down in Birmingham then, and he used to fly up on the same flight as me. And now when I see him, in fact, I saw him in Curry House in Glasgow a few weeks ago. Came up and gave me a big slap on the back. I thought he'd actually caused me damage. But nah, one of the great characters, and some great stories over the years. And like I say, I don't think I'd be the first to possibly fall out there, or maybe even the last now. I do think he's mellowed a bit over the years, but nah, good guy.
A couple of people that you've worked alongside as well, and are characters, like you say, both sides. You've got Chris Boyd, Ali McCoist, Chris Sutton, and Neil Lennon. How different is it working with them kind of as part of the team as it was when they were either at Rangers or Celtic?
Just all good guys, really. Coisty, obviously, is Coisty. He's the same to everyone, treats everyone the same. Brilliant. And as a co-commentator, hugely passionate. Obviously, he's now doing working for another channel, so I don't actually see that much of him, although I do hear the occasional text from him, or get the occasional text from him now and again. Boydie, one of the game's proper characters, lucky enough to commentate on so many of his goals over the years. I think he and Kenny Miller and Henrik Larsson were probably the guys that I used to think, crikey, these guys carry on scoring, I'm going to run out of lines for them. And actually, in the modern day, I put James Tavernier in that bracket, because I know everybody thinks he just scores penalties, but he's actually scored about 70 goals from either free kicks, open play, a phenomenal goal-scoring record. Known Lenny for many years as well. All good guys, and David Proven, who I first worked with as a co-com when I came up, different class. And Andy Walker the same, where you have that sort of relationship with your co-com, where you just, I hate it when commentators and co-commentators crash each other all the time, because that shouldn't be happening. You should be on the same wavelength, and I was lucky enough to be on the same wavelength with those two guys as well. And now Chris Sutton for most of the season. I love Chris, brilliant sense of humour, intelligent guy, not afraid to offer an opinion. Same with Boydie. James McFadden as well, who I've worked with, top. He's another all-rounder who can commentate or be a studio guest. So I've been really lucky on that front. I think nearly all the co-commentators I've worked with over the years, including Chris Kamara, I'm still in touch with. So, it's I've been lucky.
Cool. And, moving on then from Scottish League football to international football, over just about 24 years, 62 Scotland games you commentated on. Unbelievable. And is there a kind of pick-out game for you?
Believe it or not, there was quite a few over the years, even though it was a nearly but not quite story. And my time commentating on Scotland did coincide with them not actually qualifying for a major tournament, but it wasn't my fault. It just happened that way. But obviously, some really good games when they beat the Netherlands and gave Germany a run for their money, and a lot of games over the years. I missed the win in France because I'd moved. I wasn't working for them then, but for Sky then. But I'd have to say that night in Serbia, when they qualified for the Euros after such a long wait, again in COVID circumstances, and obviously we weren't actually in Belgrade. We had to commentate on the game from Sky headquarters in London, and it was a magnificent night. A long time in the waiting, and it was just it so summed up Scotland that the night they finally qualified, we're not even there. We're sitting in a little booth commentating in London. Tartan Army aren't even there. Rory Hamilton, my fellow commentator, who's a big Scotland fan, said, "Blimey, we've qualified. I'm sitting on the couch watching it with my dog." For all the countries we've all been to over the years, But hey, it happened, and it was a memorable night with David Marshall. I'm quite glad he hadn't gone off his line, because had he done so, it would have been the biggest backtrack and reverse manoeuvre in commentating history, because I was well away quoting Flower of Scotland within seconds. So great night, would have been magnificent to be there, but finally made it to that tournament and maybe didn't do themselves as much justice as they might have done in that tournament. But hey, another go at it coming up next month.
Yeah, that's it. And this time they've done it. They've qualified with the backing of the fans and with people they're able to see it. A lot of kind of success, as you said, in recent years for Scotland. Well, under Steve Clarke, you would have dealt with him at Kilmarnock and now obviously at Scotland as well. How important do you think he's been to kind of just a bit of a fresher mindset of the Scottish national team?
Yeah, he's done a terrific job. When he came in, there were some difficult opponents, as I recall, and a few iffy results. Took him a while to initially, I think, actually do what he did at Kilmarnock with the Scotland team, make them hard to beat, and move it on from there into other things that you want to do. And his record's been great. Yeah, there's been the odd run where not much happens, but there's been runs where good things happen. And in the finals, again, things kind of conspired against Scotland a little bit with injuries and whatever, and absent players, and 2 games at Hampden. Now we've got the fans back, and I'm pleased for the Tartan Army, having met so many of them over the years, because they're always a very welcoming bunch, that they will actually go to a major tournament. I'm sure nobody will hardly notice them at all as they make their way around Germany. It's going to be great for them. And I'm utterly convinced that Scotland won't lose the opening game against Germany. I've already gone for a 1-1 draw in my Euro Predictor League, so we'll see.
And Steve Clarke, Gordon Strachan, as you touched on, Alex McLeish. Scotland has had so many iconic managers, and in recent times, iconic moments. Have you got a favourite commentary line from yourselves in any of this games, any of the recent games?
I think I would have to go with the night in Belgrade when they qualified, because I remember similar story doing Hibs Rangers in the Scottish Cup final in 2016. And when I was younger in my career, sometimes you would overthink what you were going to say in commentary, and then when the goal went in, it was nothing like you thought it was going to be. So you left yourself a bit stranded, or changing your mind and changing your words. So I don't think a lot of commentators script what they're going to say, but they have an idea of what they're going to say. And when Hibs, I thought, might actually win the Scottish Cup for the first time in 114 years, I thought, crikey, I better be ready for this. And I did have things in my mind and the odd little line written down for full time, and probably the same with the Scotland getting through to the Euros. So I just kept on trotting out loads of lines, and including lines from Flower of Scotland, and people seem to like it. But you know, it's the passion of the place. I would say I've become a Scotland supporter more than England at the moment, having covered them so many years and living up here. So it would probably be that, purely because of the long wait that we had for it, which covered almost the entire span that I was commentating on Scotland, bizarrely. And once Rory started commentating on Scotland, obviously now they're getting to tournaments all the time. Bloody typical, huh?
Yeah. Just away from Scotland then, and kind of across your whole career, is there a favourite commentary line that you've had, or one that kind of sticks in your mind and you go, yeah, that was a good one?
Yeah, I know, it's a funny business, isn't it, really? You like to sound a bit humble, but when you do crack a good line as a commentator, it is a good feeling. You know, you're like, oh God, I actually did all right there. Whereas a lot of the time you're thinking, crikey, I hope I called that right, called the right name out for starters, as well as everything else. So when Henrik Larsson scored his remarkable chip against Rangers in the 6-2 game, which is amazing to think that's 24 years ago now, I think I kept it quite simple, and I did that is sensational, which kind of worked for the goal. To this day, people still come up and quote that line at me. In fact, I was walking through Glasgow Central a while back, and some kid came up and started screaming it at me and asked for a selfie. And I could see all the other people in the station thinking, what's going, who on earth, what's happening there? So it's good that fans still remember it, although after 24 years, maybe I need to come up with a new line. But the Scottish Cup final I mentioned with Rangers Celtic in 2002, just as Neil McCann put his cross in at the end, I said, is there going to be a twist in the tail? And there was. Peter Lovenkrantz scored, obviously, and that worked well. I did a piece with the Rangers Review magazine just before the cup final, and I said I might have actually used that line 50, 60 times. Is there going to be a twist in the tail when nothing ever happened in previous games? So it finally came off. And when Hibs finally won the Scottish Cup, it's I think it's those moments that come along that don't come along very often that you want to get right. And I know a lot of Hibs fans had tattoos, and somebody was telling me the other day they've still got the commentary as a ringtone of the winning goal from David Gray, and that's always very humbling. But essentially, it is your job to call the big moments. And I've been lucky that there's been a lot over the years, obviously with the old firms, and also those championship playoff finals that I did in England for 4 years, where the stakes were high getting into the Premier League, and I actually got to commentate on West Ham winning one of those, losing one actually the year before, and then winning. So we were talking about bias earlier. Obviously, you have to put it out your mind and do it. And it was actually quite easy. I actually commentated on West Ham losing 7-1 twice at Man United and Blackburn. So I was pretty used to factoring out the fact that I supported them and just doing the game and concentrating on that. But hopefully, it's always a pleasure, but very humbling and probably embarrassing when people quote commentary lines at you. But if it sticks in their mind, if it aided the moment, if it captured the moment, if you like, then that's what kind of we're here for.
Yeah, and you said before, you know, there isn't a script written as a commentator, and that's just the way football is. But how much work does go into it? You see, Clive Tilsley's maybe a good example. He posts his stuff, his kind of game prep on Twitter, X now. But yeah, there's obviously a lot of preparation goes into it. And when you were saying earlier, Martin O'Neill and now Derek McInnes is giving you a note maybe 10, 15 minutes before, how much preparation and how difficult is that?
Yeah, it's part of the job. I think we all do very similar to Clive. Everyone does it in their own different way. pretty sure Clive writes his out, which I do as well. A lot of guys do it off the computer, but I prefer to write out all my individual player stats in a similar sheet to Clive, because as I write them out, I remember them. Hopefully, we're not having to look at them too much when I'm at the ground and commentating. But listen, I would probably say I do at least 1 day prep per game. So a Thursday or a Friday. A lot of the time I have the Premier League game as well. At the weekend is a Scottish. So prepare one on a Thursday, one on a Friday, and go do it. But listen, we can. I mean, the Old Firm game has probably got about 30, 40 great lines around it, but most of the time you don't have time to get them in, and that's how it should be, because the game is actually 100 miles per hour, frantic, something going on. You know, we sometimes it's hard to actually squeeze replays in of something that's happened because something will immediately be happening at the other end. So you probably don't even get to use half of these lines, maybe more, in games like that. But then I have done games where, you know, I did Ross County St Mirren earlier in the season where I think I might have regurgitated every line from the first half in the second half as well, because there wasn't a lot going on. So these things are said to try us. Every game is different. But the big games, really, I try not to do too many stats, because I do think big games, especially the Old Firms, carry themselves, and there's enough going on for the players to be taking centre stage.
Okay, and just finally for you, Ian, your favourite pizza topping?
Absolute pepperoni monster, no danger, coupled with quite a few other things, mushrooms mainly. Generally a meat feast would do, but if I had to go for one, it would probably just be pepperoni. Occasional, went through a phase of the old Hawaiian ham and pineapple, but nah, it's got to be pepperoni now. Got to be.
That's going to be the thing that people take away the most from this, is that you like Hawaiian pizza. So
probably.
Thank you very much for your time today, Ian, and thank you for everybody who has listened in. Let us know what you thought of it below, and if there's anybody else you'd like us to speak to. Once again, thank you, Ian, for being such a brilliant guest.
Been a pleasure, Alex. Good questions, rubbish answers, but hey, good luck.
Thank you.